And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it is wonderful to have a brand new guest, a name which certainly the Warren Posse will know absolutely very well, and that's Raheem Kassam. Raheem, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I woke up especially early for you as well on a Saturday morning of all things. Which, if anybody knows my Friday nights, is quite difficult.
Oh, you don't look too worse for wear, so all good, all good. But if obviously people aren't following you, might be some of the UK side, but at Raheem Kassam obviously is on Twitter X. He is former editor-in-chief of National Pulse, and we'll touch on some of those articles, thenationalpulse.com, former editor-in-chief of Breitbart News in London, former senior advisor to the one and only Nigel Farage, and I think a good friend of his now. And together with Steve Bannon and Jason Miller, they co-hosted War Room back in the day. So lots to talk about. But Raheem, I mean, eight years ago, you were in the race to become UKIP leader. And I remember your campaign launch in the Westminster Arms, that picture of you behind the bar, pulling a pint. Maybe just touch on that a little bit, how you kind of got involved with UKIP, with Nigel, the political scene there before over stateside.
Yeah, do you know what's funny? I find myself telling this story more and more, and I don't know if it's a sign of people having interest or just getting old and repetitive. And I was actually telling it last night. I'll give you the brief version. I mean, I was always fascinated by politics. I remember watching the first Gulf War on television. Obviously, we were all, aghast at 9/11, and there were just these sort of major flashpoints in my life that I thought, I kind of feel that I need to do something in that world, and especially, well, I unfortunately I found myself a little bit of a Blairite in the early Blair years. I was a kid and I fell for the sort of the things can only get better mantra. That was the prime minister for the American audience from the late 90s, which was very much sort of a Clintonian figure, a third wave figure in British politics. And I did get involved. I got involved straight after college, after university, by shadowing my local member of parliament around and just kind of knocking on doors and understanding the issues, and finding out at a kind of local level that most of good worthwhile politics is actually local and not national. And so naturally I gravitated to the national, just being useless like that. Started to work a little bit with Britain's Conservative Party, and very, very quickly realized that it was, no such thing as conservative. And when the David Cameron Conservative Party in 2010 got into coalition government with the Liberal Democrat Party and handed over so many things to the left, I just sort of threw my hands up and said, I can't do this in good faith. I can't be a part of that. And I did something that they call defecting. And I left. And I say defecting not because I was, an elected member or anything, but I was on the Conservative Party's youth board at the time, Conservative Future. And so it caused a little bit of sort of internal physios. I remember getting prodded in the chest quite angrily at Tory conference and told that, I'd never work in politics again and so forth.
Little did they know.
Well, I showed them. And then, I kept bumping into this jovial smoking chap outside lots of Westminster pubs, and we would often talk politics, and we would often talk about women, and we would talk about all sorts of things. And that person turned out to be Nigel Farage. So we made friends. He asked me to come and work for him, and the rest, I suppose, is history.
Tell us, because from Hammersmith to the White House, or from using the tube to using Trump Force One, it's certainly a change in gear. How and when did you think you wanted to put your energy into the US and not the UK? Was there a specific moment, or was that just a general drift?
There are a lot of moments, actually. I mean, I think 9/11 got me, really, really first trying to understand the US, trying to understand why somebody would do that, trying to understand what the American reaction was. I stayed up, I think, for 3 days straight, just in my little box room in Uxbridge in West London. I had a 17-inch CRT Sanyo TV propped up on a coffee table, and just stared at it, and couldn't wrap my head around it really. And so, did a lot of reading and a lot of learning. And, this is a pre-YouTube world. So I'm going to the library and checking books out and trying to, the old-fashioned way of figuring things out. And my parents were never really particularly political. So it's not like I could sort of turn to them easily and go, oh, this thing happened. What does it mean? I think a lot of the world felt that way at that point in time. I'm certainly talking to a lot of my friends now in New York, where I go, probably for 10 days every month at the moment. They certainly say that they felt like that at the time also, just completely lost. The rules-based order, right, that Bannon always talks about was just, in ash, right? It was in ash. It was falling in ash from the sky with bodies littered around it. And, not to be too graphic about it, but that's how it jarred so much. And I was still in school. I was still in what they call high school over here at the time, in secondary school. And for us, our teachers had no idea what to tell us or to say about it. And so that probably was a major flashpoint where I thought, having knowledge of and being involved in US politics seems quite important from a global level. I studied it at university, studied US politics in large part in my course at the University of Westminster. And I never really planned to get involved in US politics or media until one day, I think this was 2013, my phone rings. I'm actually sitting in the house of a friend who went on to be the Conservative Party's operations director. And we're sitting in his house. I think it's a Saturday night, and we're just having a dinner. And my phone rings, and I don't know the number. And I pick it up. I said, "Hello." And the voice down the other end of the phone goes, "Hey, you don't know who this is, but my name is Stephen K. Bannon, and I'm the executive chairman of the Breitbart News Network." And I was like, okay. At first I thought this might be like a sales call. I was like, okay, I'm Mr. Bannon, how can I help you? He says, well, we're opening a London bureau for Breitbart. Do you know it? I was like, vaguely. I don't, read it all that much, but I know of it. And he said, everybody tells me I should hire you to be my London editor. Up here at the time, I was making about £65,000 a year blogging from my bedroom. So I thought that was a great gig, and I sort of said to him, thanks, but I'm not that interested. He said, look, just meet me next week. We'll chat. We did. He offered me $35,000 a year to run it, to which I said, see you, mate. I'm not doing that. We spent sort of the next 4 months negotiating back and forth. And I say negotiating back and forth. It was more him going 45 and me going, nah, 55, nah. He finally ended up on 65 plus a staff plus an office. And I was like, right, fine, I'm in. And that was the moment. Really.
Steve can drive a hard bargain. He's a businessman.
But I think, in fairness to him, I don't think he knew the lay of the land in the UK. I think he thought he would sort of grab somebody just out of college who wasn't earning anything and whatever. And we had already kind of, I had already developed several news websites at the time and built a little brand and a little following. So he had to pay for it. And that drew me in, right? That drew me into the US world because, of course, every morning then we would have a Breitbart News radio show. And so for 10 a.m. my time, I would be on live with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across America. And so immediately your cadence changes, the words you use change, you start speaking in their language to try and get them to understand what's going on. And you're trying to explain like concepts like Brexit, which at the time didn't even exist as a word. We didn't even call it Brexit back then. We just called leaving the EU or getting Britain out. Or independence. Brexit was far later as a common term, and then of course you would get invited to all this stuff in the US, and how it is, the scale of it is just all so it draws you in. It really sucks you in. And I would visit DC and I would think to myself, "Wow, I'd love to live there one day." And let me tell you something, I bloody hate it here. I bloody hate it here. But I was supposed to be here after 2016 because he called me up when he went to, still speaking of Bannon, called me up when he went into the Trump campaign, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in DC. I'm on vacation. I'm hanging out with some of my mates." And he says, "Good, stay there." I said, "What do you mean stay there? I got to fly back tomorrow." He goes, No, stay there. I need you to do something for me." I said, "What is it?" He goes, "I can't tell you, but you'll find out tomorrow on the front page of the New York Times." So that sounds really, really ominous. Is that? What's funny at the time? I suppose not that funny, but what's interesting at the time, I thought, "Oh my goodness, is he getting arrested or something?" Turns out he was going to work for the Trump campaign, and he wanted me to take over the radio show. So I took over the Breitbart News radio show, got my visa and everything sorted out, stayed. I thought I'd stay for about a year. And then, life draws you in. You make friends and girlfriends and, buy things and, plant your roots by accident, really. And now it's been about 9 years sitting here in this same room on Capitol Hill.
I mean, you have a unique perspective as a Brit who's there, really understanding the UK scene and the US scene. I mean, obviously Nigel crosses over, but he doesn't live in the US. Me, the only person that I kind of think who has such a deep understanding both sides is maybe Seb Gorka. But tell us what that's like, because you're no longer an outsider, are you? How do you kind of fit in? And your perspective is something fairly unique in the US media, certainly.
Look, I'm just a loudmouth. I always have been. And so when you ask me how I fit in, not well, really, anywhere. I mean, you can talk to some of our mutual friends, like Jason Miller as an example, or even Steve, and they'll all tell you, yeah, Raheem has a really sharp mind for politics, but he's bloody annoying. And he rubs people up the wrong way. And he doesn't really just, I have no charm when it comes to what I believe in, right? I couldn't run for anything. I learned that a long time ago. You made reference to the aborted UKIP leadership election campaign. I was 2 weeks into that campaign, and I thought to myself, "I hate this. I will be terrible at it." And I was like, "You know what? I'm out. I don't want to do it."
You might have lasted less than Diane James, fewer days.
I think that the right way to do things in life is to not pretend, right? And I think if a lot of politicians actually acted on their instincts, on their gut level instincts about what they do, they wouldn't do half the bad shit they do. And so that was my moment where I thought to myself, I can continue this on. I could probably win if I really pull the stops out, and I can be miserable for the rest of my life. Or I can pull out, do something I like doing, and be miserable for the rest of my life. So I chose the latter, and I don't regret that at all. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say I fit in very well at all. I hope this doesn't sound sad, but I sort of barely leave the house anymore. If I do leave the house, it's sort of to take a train or a plane somewhere for an event or a meeting or a speech. Or if I get really antsy or bored or whatever, I like to take the train up. I only live a few minutes here from Union Station in DC. So just get the train up to New York, and I sit at a nice pub for the weekend or something, see some friends, very quiet sort of things. But it's not that thing anymore where, you get all these major conferences and conventions and all of this stuff. And a lot of people still find that useful and still find it, helpful to run around and shake hands and exchange business cards. I'm much more reclusive than ever. I sit at home. I read a lot. I like to keep a very close knit group of friends because the old adage: if you want a friend in DC, get a dog. It's really not a town where you do want to trust people and make long lasting friendships or relationships. I've got a few, luckily, thankfully. Steve being one of those, Nigel being another. That's a weird thing. That's a weird thing when your best friends in the world are people like Steve Bannon and Nigel Farage. And I don't say that as in like They're people I work with on a daily basis. They're just my mates. Like, we just call up and shoot the shit every so often. I spent last Christmas at Steve's house with him because I couldn't make it back to England in time. And I don't think politics came up more than once over like a week-long period. It was football. He hates soccer. I love soccer. It was him trying to show me American football. Can't stand it. It was a lot of food, those sorts of things. So if anything, I've sort of become more of a political socialite at this point.
But it's weird, yeah.
Or an unsocialite.
If I ever have to watch another NFL game again, I don't know what I will do. I lose the will to live. But apologies to the posse. But when you met Steve and Nigel there, what comes across is they're authentic individuals. They actually care about it. They wear their hearts in the sleeve. And both of them, I probably actually know Steve better than I do Nigel. But both of them, what you see is what you get. And sometimes you see the public persona and then you meet them in private and they're just very different. Actually, there isn't much difference. They are who they are. And that's possibly one of the reasons why they've been so successful and maybe makes them so dangerous. And that's why they've both been targeted so much.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are little things I think that people don't get to see with both of them. Just sort of almost softer sides, that they would both hate me telling telling the audience, but genuinely caring sides. You see the look I've seen the look in both of their eyes when I've disappointed them, and it's not anger and it's not resentment. It's that sort of fatherly disappointment. Why did you say that? Sometimes live on air, I would say certain things, and Steve would just look at me like, "Oh dear," But it has gone the other way as well. Believe me. They are extremely authentic characters, and I think the same about myself sometimes as well. It's like, why am I drawn to those people? Because I do that too, right? I wear my heart and my politics and everything on my sleeve. I say whatever pops into my head and deal with the consequences later. I certainly tweet whatever comes into my head and deal with the consequences later. And I think at the end of the day as well, when you look at their private lives, they are people who have a genuine like joie de vivre. They are actually life loving people. They cling on to every moment, and they want people around them to enjoy those moments too. They're also people who want to impart the wisdom of the hard lessons they've learned. Right? When I first met Steve, he said to me, "Look, this pub at 4:00 every afternoon thing is not going to work for you in the long term." He says, you need to knuckle down, be a monk for 3 years, bury your head in books, learn, and then you get to, express yourself in different ways and live life in different ways. But put together that base of knowledge. I completely ignored all of it, of course, and proceeded to go to the pub at 4:00 every day, and still do it. But it did kind of. I've got a stack of books now. It's so weird, actually, now that I think about it. Behind the camera here, I have a stack of books up against the wall. And now when I think about it, that is exactly how Steve's stack of books used to be in his old Bryant Park, New York apartment. It's just books and books stacked up against the wall. No bookshelf, just a mess. And, everything sort of half-read, dog-eared, thrown aside, like this, don't like this. And those guys really, really taught me all of that. Kind of just knuckle down as hard as you can. Learn as much as you can. And without their influence and things like that, I would have never published the first book, No-Go Zones, which was a bestseller, and I think really changed a lot of the conversation on migration in the Western world. After that book came out, Angela Merkel started being honest about the concept of a no-go zone, of a no-go area, as she called it. And of course, now we all accept that these things are relatively commonplace. But at the time, that was no-go zones were a no-go zone.
What they are. Well, I want to touch on that later, and of course, your other book on Enoch Powell is also available. The greatest Prime Minister Britain ever had. Okay, so U.S. election, 18 days out as we currently record. I think 16 days by the time this comes out on Monday, and not just the most important day of most people's lifetimes in the US, but actually worldwide, because the impact on freedoms for all of us, and where America lead, others follow. And the last thing we want to be doing, we have been doing, is following a decrepit individual. And now Comrade Kamala could be the next option on that, and that should fill anyone with fear. But what's your assessment? Obviously, you write about this in the National Pulse, and your finger is on the pulse in terms of understanding. But what's kind of your assessment generally? And then we'll pick up me and some of them just 2.5 weeks out.
Yeah, look, so just so people understand my method when it comes to this stuff, I just call and text everyone I know as much as possible, right? What's going on? What are you hearing? Where are you going? What's the reception? What are the internal campaign numbers, please? No, you don't want to tell me? I'll go ask someone else. They want to tell me? I'll go and ask someone else. Basically, I just bug my way into amassing information. I mean, that is the job of a journalist, really, is just to bother your way into knowledge. The reason that just to draw, I'm doing the weave, by the way, here, like Trump does, the story weave. Just to draw you away from the question for a second, the journalists that people loathe, which is, I understand most of them, the reason they are not good journalists is they don't do their jobs. Like they make it up. They have an opinion, and then they ascribe current events to fit whatever their opinion is. The job of a good and real journalist, and there are some, people like, in fact, I'll say something that might surprise people, but like there are some Guardian reporters like Hugo Lowell who I think are just excellent at their jobs. Now, I'm really good at gatekeeping information that I don't want getting out there, and someone like Hugo is really good at extracting it from people like me. So I get to really see, how I come across to other people, because I'm always doing that and digging for info. And that's how you get to understand a campaign. That's how you get to where I was in May, where I was saying something is going dreadfully wrong with the Trump campaign. There is no ground game. Susie and Chris, who are at the head of the campaign, had sort of checked out for the summer, almost putting their feet up, thinking that they were going to run easy against Biden, win easy against Biden, and then, of course, made the cataclysmic campaign error of accepting that early debate and getting Biden out of the race. Now, at first, it seemed a lot worse than it was. But the more people have seen Kamala Harris, the less they like her. And the more she gets out there, I think the more votes she loses, frankly. The campaign turned at the end of August. I and others embarked upon a bit of a pressure campaign to bring other people in. So they brought people in from the PAC, the Political Action Committee that sort of runs parallel to the campaign. For those who aren't sort of aware of how that works, it's like an outside group that does a lot of the campaigning, but technically, legally speaking, the campaign and the PACs can't talk directly to each other. So instead of doing that, they shifted people from the PAC into the campaign and then brought on, old MAGA stalwarts like Corey Lewandowski. And since then, you've seen a big uptick again, not just in, Trump's polling numbers, but his own, I guess, vivaciousness about the campaign. He's in 2 or 3 places every day at the moment. It's got that 2016 energy to it, and I think, to touch wood, I think we are on a winning course right now. I will say Trump will win despite his campaign leadership, not because of his campaign leadership, and it will also win because she has just become. I mean, she's become almost as unpopular as Hillary Clinton. And I say almost because America got to know Hillary Clinton really well for decades and decades. If they got to know Kamala as well as they knew Hillary, she would be half as popular, if that, than Hillary Clinton. She is just a fundamentally unlikable person. You see that play out this week, where she was the subject of mockery at a large-scale New York gala, right? The Al Smith dinner.
It's a great speech.
It was
by Trump.
The whole thing. I mean, the host gets up at the beginning and it's like, why is Kamala Harris not here?
Yeah.
And for that to happen to her, I mean, her team, this is the problem about having a team that is mostly young and inexperienced, is that they think everything happens on TikTok. They forget that actually most high propensity voters are getting their news in older fashioned ways. And to age a lot of people here, one of the older fashioned ways now is still like Facebook, right? But it's also broadcast TV, and it's also local TV, and it's also newspapers. And yes, they are dwindling and falling and whatever, but the older, higher propensity voter still wants that like element. They still want the masthead, right? They still want to see the logo of the news organization at the top of the thing they're reading. They don't necessarily want that 15-second clip of some, nose ringed purple hair woman who thinks abortion is an alternative to having a personality, So I think Trump nicks it. If you want to go state by state, we can do that too. I'm not confident about Nevada, and I'm not confident about Wisconsin. The rest, I'm pretty happy about.
Just a sidestep. One of the dangers I've seen of the U.S. political scene is the industry that kind of feeds on it. I think when I talked to Terry Giles, who was very close to Ben Carson whenever he ran, and chatting about what the campaign was like for his involvement on that, and the amount of money that just disappears on consultants everywhere consulting on something. And it is an industry in the like that Britain have no idea. Ours is very different. And is that one of the people will say whatever you want them to say? You're right. There is kind of out of uni and you go into a job, you get paid to consult on stuff that you actually have no world life experience, and you'll say whatever has to be said. And if your candidate loses, hey, you'll just find another one. That seems to be one of the failures, I think, of the US political scene. As someone from afar watching.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if I were to be able to give, one piece of advice to the American body politic writ large, it is repeal Citizens United. Repeal the idea that corporations are people in a political sense, and that they can give limitless amounts of money to politics, to PACs, and so on and so forth. A lot of politicians, and I think Matt Gaetz popularized it, I know a lot of people have said it, politicians should be made to wear the logos of their sponsors, like a race car, like a race car driver. And you have to have patches that say Pfizer and, Exxon and all of this stuff. I actually think that if you're not going to get big money out of politics, then that's what you should do with it. But we're not even at the point of having that conversation over here yet. You're still talking about Nancy Pelosi making massive stock trades on a day-to-day basis, and everyone knows she's doing it. Everybody knows it's insider trading, and everybody, and in this town, it's just sort of an open joke. And but the butt of the joke is not Nancy Pelosi. The butt of the joke is the American public. That Nancy is fleecing by pretending to be a representative of theirs in any way, shape, or form, but actually just enriching herself at it. And I think if you get that corporate money out of politics, and if you police things like that a lot more, you will get a far more representative form of government. The real threat to democracy is not Donald Trump or anything like that. It's corporate America. And time again, corporate money has corrupted. It's corrupted movements. It corrupted the Tea Party. It's corrupted. It corrupted Brexit in a lot of ways. And we saw what happened with Brexit after the people voted for a certain thing. Britain's migration is still at record highs. Why? Because the corporate lobby continues to lobby for cheap migrant imported labor. And that was the point of Brexit. There's no point in doing Brexit unless you actually control your own borders. You can tell I get very frustrated by this, because I see the sorts of cash that flies around here. And I know I don't want to get anybody in trouble or make it awkward for you at all. But I get myself in trouble with this a lot, because I call out people on our own side too. About this stuff. And about a year ago, I ran a story about how Matt Schlapp and the American Conservative Union were taking money from the New Venture Fund. Well, the New Venture Fund is a Soros left-wing Democrat fund that push money around politics to, fuel things like criminal justice reform and DEI policies and things like that. Listen, I'm a reporter. I reported the news. And of course, Matt gets angry at me and Steve gets angry at me, and that's friendly fire. Why are you doing that? I say, why are they taking the money in the first instance? So somehow I'm to blame for bringing it into light. And I don't have any allegiance to organizations, institutions, and people that I think are purchasable. I find that to be the lowest form. Money is the lowest form of doing politics.
No, completely. And what you mentioned the speech that Trump gave a couple of days ago at that Catholic event, and I saw the MC pointing out that Kamala wasn't there. And you watch Trump speech, and I've seen him speak at CPAS, saw him at Pennsylvania rally, saw a North Carolina rally, and there's nothing like it. I mean, if you come from UK politics and you come across this, you're just in awe of the camera light action type of thing. But you watch Trump speak and his energy, his passion. However many times they're trying to actually try and assassinate him, and he's got this boundless energy, and they're a joy to watch, speaking for an hour and a half. It seems like he just gets better and better, and there's no end to it. He's never pushed back, never pushed down. Tell me about your thoughts on that and the energy he has on that campaign trail.
Well, as George Galloway once said to Saddam Hussein, I salute his indefatigability. And I suppose I'm George and Trump is Saddam in that analogy. He is. I mean, look, I've traveled with him on his plane. I've interviewed him. I've hung out, socially at Mar-a-Lago probably 24 times. I've seen him at his best, but I've also seen him tired. I think you hang around with him long enough, you see him tired, and they're the same telltale signs as well as any of us, really. But you see it in Bannon, you see it in Nigel, where a door will close. If a car door, for instance, closes, and you're just sort of sitting next to Nigel, and he'll just go, oh, and all the exhaustion you'll see just like wash over him. And they all have the trick in that world, and this is why I would not be good at it. The trick in that world is to hold it all in and just deal with it and just man up and plow through. And then once you can get to wherever you are, private, bedtime, whatever, you just let it all go. I can't do that. I need to work very hard and then rest very hard, and then work very hard and then rest very hard. But these men, these locomotives of populism, right? They just keep chugging, they just keep going. And what's their fuel, right? Their fuel, especially for Donald Trump, are the people standing in front of him. Yeah. Right? It gets to the point now at the rallies where he recognizes people in the crowd who he's seen, years ago, perhaps at an event. Go, oh, I know you. I saw you at this thing. We took a picture together. Who was also very good at that? Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell. I read several stories about him recognizing people from 18 years prior, and just picking up the conversation where they left off 18 years prior. And it's like that moment in Butler, right, where Trump walks up onto the stage and he goes, as I was saying. And that was an important moment for several reasons, because it wasn't just, obviously making comedy out of tragedy there in that moment. Very important to bring people's spirits back up and to let them know that you're still there and you're still fighting and you're going to continue regardless. But it was also to personalize that moment, right? You were all here with me, 4 weeks ago, whatever, 5 weeks ago, when it happened. We're all here again today. And you see the same thing. I got to host a radio show with Steve so much back in the day. That was a call-in radio show. And the lines would light up, the board would light up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, every single morning, as soon as they knew Steve was hosting the show, because they all wanted to talk to him. But more importantly, he wanted to talk to all of them. He would make it very clear, I'm going to get to every single one of you callers. Don't hang up. I know you might have to wait a little bit, but I want to talk to everyone and give everyone their time, their airtime, and treat them respectfully and listen to them. It's the same thing as Nigel going out in public. Yeah. And we've seen the videos of the milkshakes getting thrown on him, and those are unfortunately the hazards of being a populist, because you actually do want to go and hang out with ordinary people. You want to go to the pub. You want to stand in the beer garden. You want to have a smoke with them. You want to give them proper time and attention. That That without that, you cannot be a populist. You cannot book read populism. This is a major problem we have on our side at the moment, is that much of the MAGA movement, much of the post-Brexit movement are these academic types who have sort of come along and gone, yeah, it's very interesting. But you can't converse with them outside the pub. They're not willing to understand the ordinary person. They're certainly not going and walking the streets of Bradford and watching how demographic shift is occurring, and how the mass rape of young white girls occurred in the UK under the police's nose in those communities. They're not interested in doing these things. And I think in as much as the left doesn't understand, the corporate left, the Marxist left, in a lot of senses, there is a populist left. But in as much as the establishment doesn't understand populism, we also have to be very watchful that our own side continues to understand populism. We cannot hand it back to the academics who the Alan Skeds of the world, who founded the original UK Independence Party, the academics who founded the Alternative for Deutschland Party. We're very grateful that those things happened and that those guys, had their involvement to get those things off the ground. But these cannot be turned into bookish movements. They are, for want of a better term, they are street movements. They are movements of ordinary people. I like to rant.
It's true. It's the academics looking down at those with passion who actually believe, and there's a confusion. They think they like that intellectually, but they're not sure where that passion.
This is where the Tory party is going wrong, right?
Yeah.
Is the Conservative Party in Britain, wants to do pseudo populism. It just wants to be able to sort of tweet images of England's green and pleasant land and say, we will bring down migration if re-elected in 5 years' time. And you go, well, you were in office for the last 15 years and you doubled it and tripled it and quadrupled it. Last year, I think, 1.1 million new visas issued for foreigners going into the United Kingdom. A population of about 60 odd million, right? There, but realistically far higher now, likely. And these academic types, the Tories that you meet at the Tory conferences and things like that, if with their wet little handshakes, will come up to you and go, well, I certainly think we could bring down migration a smidgen. We could certainly shave 1% off the tax rate. It's like, no, you don't understand. We tub thumping populists want to completely change the way the system works. I'm not interested in your little salami slicing incrementalism. We are revolutionaries in a very real sense.
I know immigration being the huge issue across Europe and the US, and one of the two, immigration and the economy, the two big issues for the US election. But you mentioned your book, which looked at those no-go areas, how Sharia law is impacting or is coming to a neighborhood near you. That's something the UK, that's something I know living in London, Stan. I'm sure when you look back, does America get that clash? They get the immigration, but one of the big problems of mass immigration is when Islam comes in and then wants to be dominant, wants that superiority, wants to impose itself, especially in the legal system, on the food system, financial system. Is that part of the US understanding, or they still think this is just a European issue that is far away for them?
It was certainly a much hotter conversation topic, in a post 9/11 world. It is definitely faded away in between, and the Americans sort of looked on at the this drip of terror attacks across Europe. Somebody got macheted in Paris and Stockholm and Copenhagen and Berlin, and a truck crashed into a Christmas festival, and they sort of made it. I said it in that way because they sort of made it like a mundane, this is the end of the news hour type story. 3 people were killed today as a man shouting Allahu Akbar drove into Berlin. Anyway, next up, and it's like you have normalized this, which something should never like that be normalized. People should not have to fear going to a Christmas market. You should not have to erect these bollards up everywhere to stop cars running people over. This is not the mark of a civilized society, and it's not the mark of a civilized immigration system. And I'm very, very upfront about it. These people are barbarians, and they should not be let into the Western world. And we should be far more, I'll use a dirty word, discriminatory about who comes into the Western world. And my parents did it the right way. I was telling somebody last night, the difference was when we were growing up, they told us to integrate, to assimilate. We got sent to a Christian school. We said Christian prayers growing up. Even though I was raised in a Muslim family, they were cool with it because it meant that we would be a better part of British society. And now, of course, you walk around places. I'd use Bradford as an example, but yeah, why not use London as an example? If you start moving outside of Mayfair and Westminster, you will find pockets where the signage on the street is in Bengali and is in Urdu, and Tower Hamlets is a great example. Look for ramen. All the stories anyway, but people who don't really need to go and look those things up, because I actually have copies right by my feet here. I actually wrote that in 2016 and 17, and I the publisher and I kind of went back and forth on the cover jacket and the subtitle. I didn't like how Sharia law is coming to a neighborhood near you, because Sharia is law, and I wanted how Sharia is coming to a neighborhood near you, and they said nobody knows what that is. I said, well, they're about to find out, because in places like Hamtramck in Michigan, and of course immediately after October 7th, and indeed on the anniversary of October 7th, they're now starting to see this back in their communities again, and fearing it like they did post 9/11, is that actually they're not like us. They're not interested in being like us. They are a ghettoized enclave of people who often will speak different languages. I write in this book. One of the things that I think it doesn't stand out about this enough, and I wish I'd stressed it more, was when I was going around all of these neighborhoods from Europe to the US, I noticed one thing. I don't know why I noticed it. It just jumped out at me. All these apartment buildings that migrants are crammed into, they all have huge satellite dishes on the balconies. And I asked everybody in those neighborhoods, like, what is going on here? Yeah, well, they don't speak English, so they are trying to get foreign language TV. So they all have these massive satellite dishes. And then when I went to Hamtramck and Dearborn, same thing. And I started to look it up, and I was reading local forums, internet forums of people, and it was exactly the same thing. People were discussing, oh, how do I get this Bengali TV station? Well, you have to have this satellite and all that. They're not interested in learning the language. They're not interested in contributing in any reasonable way. I've actually had conversations since after this book came out with people in those types of neighborhoods, where they say, oh, I had a cab driver in New York about a month ago, and he was just railing about the Western world and all sorts of nasty things. And I said to him, well, why are you even here? He says, being here for me is like being on a building site. I go to work, and at the end of the day, I'm going to go home. And home for him was, Egypt, I think, or something like that. And I just think, what have we gotten ourselves into here, where these people are in our midst and they hate us? They don't just hate us a little bit. They really, really, really hate us. They hate the world around them. It's amazing.
I think when I first got the tube one time to Mile End, early when I came, and thought, I stood there for a couple of minutes and thought, where am I? So I think that's when it hit me. Hey, I want to just two other things I want to drop in. One is so looking at those swing states, and it seems as though the more rallies Kamala does, the better it really is, because you kind of look at Trump and you think he's got phenomenal speechwriters, but I'm sure Kamala has good speechwriters, and it still doesn't work for her. So he brings his personality. And you said calling people out and engaging. But what about those? You wrote recently about Arizona, about trumping up there. Obviously, there's a lot of work being done in Pennsylvania, a lot being done there. What are your thoughts there? Because the more Kamala speaks, the more it must disappoint any potential Kamala voter.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't really follow the question there. Yes. She's repulsive. She's repulsive to her own base. It's their first instinct was right. their first instinct was to hide her away and not do interviews, and we kind of goaded her into doing it. And did you see the Brett Baer interview on Fox?
I've seen it. Yes.
I mean, so I've talked to some liberal friends about it, and they say, well, it was the right thing to do, and I think it showed she was brave. I said, whoa. She tanked.
Yeah.
It was a car crash. Like, just say it. If Trump has a bad debate or a bad night, I say it. He didn't exactly, light the room on fire in that debate with Kamala Harris. He got through it. It was probably what I said at the time. It was probably a score draw, which is probably going to be the Man United match I'm going to watch in about 10 minutes. but so I'm used to it. They have this inability to understand, or rather to accept the situation that they're in. I'm a realist as often as I possibly can be. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And this was their problem, right? Actually, you can make the case pretty well that Biden would have won Pennsylvania in this election. That case can be quite easily made. It comes down to union workers. Scranton Joe, he's known him for a long time. They actually, it's their fault that they do this, but they trust him. A lot of them trust him. They just don't feel that way about Kamala.
Yeah.
Sorry if I missed a question in there somewhere.
No. I just want to get your thoughts. I mean, very last point on a recent article you've done. I think it might have been yesterday as we're recording now. This exclusive Bannon prison statement. Biden, Harris are illegally holding me past my release date. It was a really interesting piece, and I actually saw it whenever Mo had posted it. It does. He is the one of the biggest threats because of the juggernaut he has built with War Room and being 100% America First and MAGA. What he obviously will get out at the end of the month, but just talk to me about that piece about how he actually should be released early, and yet they refuse to because they must keep him away as long as possible.
Yeah. By the way, he would want me to say this. And I've talked to him almost every day that he's been in there. And for those who are, worried and concerned, he's doing fine. He may even come out a little ripped, a little.
He promised he wouldn't. He promised he was just going to read.
Yeah, but the books are so big, he's basically having to bench them. He would want me to say this, right? The juggernaut that you refer to is not the War Room apparatus, it's the War Room audience, right? Like, that's the juggernaut. And here's the proof is in the pudding. Here's how you know. He's did the same thing at Breitbart, right? It's audience led, it's people led, it's grassroots. He's just the guy who's kind of conducting the orchestra. The musicians are the ordinary Americans out there, and in a UK sense, the ordinary Britons out there who are doing the heavy lifting in their communities every day. Who are building these families and teaching their kids the right values. Who are maybe low information voters in the sense that they don't get to spend hours a day at their computer researching any given topic. That's why I do what I do, is to act as a kind of information service point for the MAGA movement, for populist nationalists all around the world. And he would want me to remind people that they are functionally the juggernaut. He was eligible for early release under the First Step Act, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation signed into law by Donald Trump in 2018. And the First Step Act basically was a criminal justice reform type deal where if you're a non-violent criminal, very low likely reoffender, that you could shave time off your sentence, and you could do it by enrolling in certain programs, behaving certain ways, or just by the very nature of the supposed crime that you've committed, right? If you're not perceived to be a violent threat in any way, halfway house, home detention, you can serve out the last sort of 30 days of your sentence that way. And Steve is eligible for that. He is actually kind of the ideal candidate for the First Step Act in this scenario, because there's no risk of him committing contempt of Congress again, unless they put a phony committee together again and charge him with that. And also, they know where he lives. I mean, the whole world knows where he lives. He's right there, and he's literally right next to the Supreme Court every single day, without fail. They can check up on him if they like, if he tries to abscond. But they've said no. Oh, I shouldn't report it. They haven't said no. They haven't said anything. Right? They filed this thing 75 odd days ago, this petition for him to be released early, and so many different mechanisms by which that could take place. And both the DC Court and the Board of Prisons basically said, we'll get back to you. And his lawyers really haven't heard all that much since. It is incumbent upon every person who knows this story and is listening to this to send this to everyone possible and go, those guys talk about weaponization of government. Donald Trump's going to lock up his enemies, blah, blah, blah. We all know the riposte to that, Bannon and Navarro. We hear it all the time. It goes further than that. They are now breaking the law. This is an illegal detention at this point. The First Step Act is law that they are breaking to keep this man detained unlawfully, right? And nobody wants to talk about it. CNN won't cover this. Politico won't cover this. And I know because I sent it to all of them. Yesterday when we broke the story, I was like, hey, you talk about norms. You talk about weaponization. You make this allegation about Trump all the time. How about you report this? Sorry, it's a Friday afternoon. There's nobody in the office. We'll talk to you on Monday. It's the same thing as the Board of Prisons is doing. We'll get back to you. It's so far beyond a disgrace that I pray to God that when Trump gets back in the White House, that there isn't this 2016 mentality of, we can reform some of these things. If we just send some nice Bush era conservatives into these departments and get these people on board, we can sell them. This is like the civil service in the UK. They're not interested in being reformed. You have to just get rid of them. You have to fire them, and you have to take the licks of firing them. You may have court cases. You may have lawsuits. You may have settlements. You may have retribution from their side. You may have people running in front of television cameras and going, oh, I got treated badly and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. You're bad at your job. You're a corrupt human being. You're out on your ear and you're never coming back. We have to take that approach. Otherwise, Trump will just be a lame duck president from day one. You cannot put rhinos back in the administration. And I think Steve will speak more about that when he gets out. He's due for release, at the end of October. He should be released before that, quite frankly. But I think one of his first concerns after getting Trump over the line, after helping get Trump over the line, will be, right, what does the admin actually look like? Because that, I think, is even more concerning than November 5th itself.
Okay. Burn it to the ground and rebuild as America first. Raheem, thank you so much for joining us, Raheem, editor-in-chief of the National Pulse. Thanks for getting up so early, and enjoy Man U getting their asses kicked.
I will. Thank you.